So much for making your way back. I do know we've had a slightly brief session for us to network, but of course there will be more opportunities for us to do so. You are in the green room, which is the stream for retail innovation, and this is part of the sub-conference where we look to unpack many other themes that are involved with regard to the retail stream. Because we are limited for time, I'm going to introduce our first speaker who will give us a presentation over the next 20 minutes, Joao Terlico, who's the Managing Director of Sagachi Research based in Nigeria. Again, please do remember that these are interactive sessions, so if you would like to engage or ask any questions, please don't hold back. Feel free to do so and engage with our speaker. Joao, it's all yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, I do encourage interaction because I'm lonely out here. So, all right. So today, first of all, a little bit about ourselves. We are a market intelligence company focusing on Africa, and we work a lot with property developers and retailers. So today we're going to be bringing in some insights of the work we've been doing in the past for retailers. So we're going to be covering grocery retailing and shopping malls. And I'm going to bring in some illustrations of what we see happening across the continent, and I do encourage a discussion and your perspectives as well. Most references are excluding South Africa because we believe South Africa is a whole different world in terms of retailing and shopping malls. Right, so. All right, so consumer distribution landscape in Africa. Depending where you come from, the picture on the left, it's either shocking or, yes, this is absolutely normal. But this is reality in most African countries. It's the informality of markets versus the formal retail, etc. So we all know this. Small stores versus supermarkets. The small stores are usually served by wholesalers. The supermarkets have key accounts and they have modern retail, etc. To give you a perspective of what does this mean in terms of scale, and this is where it becomes interesting. You take on the left-hand side the example of Senegal. There are 380 what we consider modern retail. And this includes even the independent local shops that are quasi supermarkets. And you have 40,300 of all the other small stores. So the scale is 100 times. So this presents lots of challenges for consumer goods companies, how to serve or how to reach to the final consumers. On the right-hand side, you have the example of Kenya, which is far more developed in modern retail, but still try to spot the purple and black dots, which would be supermarkets and probably Nakumats, and they're quite few, right? So you see basically red dots across the district. If we take the numbers across countries, so modern retail represents between 1 to 10% of total grocery retail. So there's a huge gap to modernize the retail going forward. So you've seen obviously South Africa up there, but then you go down and the percentages are quite low. Now, all this story to say a few things. Now, what are the consequences for FMCG or fast-moving consumer goods companies? This is, consumer goods companies are very used to work with modern retailers. It's easy. There's a key account manager. I run my promotions. I run my leaflets. I run my aisles. I can check my product rotation on the shelves, etc., etc. Dealing with traditional retail is far more difficult and hard to manage, right? So you would have far higher capillarity of the numbers of points of sale, as we've seen, 100 times more points of sale to serve. You would have to reach them through distributors and wholesalers because you have no idea where they are and you have no idea how much they order. You cannot serve them with your trucks, etc., because they do not have docking stations. the amounts of product that they buy are far smaller, et cetera, et cetera. So it's largely very complex to handle this type of the market for consumer goods companies. You don't have control, and it's far more expensive to serve as well. So this is an interesting point, because you could argue, oh yes, that's all fine, but certain categories and a lot of consumer companies say, oh well, in our category it's okay. We need a refrigerated chain. We don't care so much about the informal retail. Well, that's actually not true. If you look at a category like yogurts, and you look at the different types of stores, dukas, kiosks, mini markets, I think this example is from Kenya, you'd have actually around between 35 to 50 to 75% of the informal stores, the ones that we saw all over the map, that actually sell these categories. So the chains are there, and somehow the products are getting to the shelves, but consumer goods companies are not seeing the full picture and the full extent of their supply chain, of their distribution chain, right? So obviously key accounts and supermarkets, they have 100% coverage, because that's the kind of the easy part to serve. This slide is a little bit of our view what's happening in this context. I started the presentation saying the road to formalization of retail in Africa. I think what we're seeing is the level or the extent of the traditional retail is so vast and so extensive and so capillary and so close to the final consumer that we believe that it won't happen overnight that everything is going to turn into supermarkets or modern distribution as we have it in other countries. So we believe that the current capillarity of traditional retail will remain for a very long time, and it will be important to understand and to tackle it and to work with it somehow. So it's most countries, 90 to 95% of grocery purchases are done through these types of channels. And it's the only way that most of the population will have access to groceries. We'll be seeing later on the shopping malls part, most population do not have a car, so they won't go to your local mall, park, and do the grocery shopping as you would do in the US or elsewhere. On the second point, the market is expanding, so economies are growing. So first of all, the population in most countries, it's growing at about 3%. Then the GDP per capita is also growing. Therefore, this means an expansion of the market of about 6% a year. This is quite huge, right? So even that modern retailers come in, open new supermarkets, et cetera, the pace of this development won't make it a significant dent to these 90 to 95% of the grocery distribution. So even that the chains are developing, and we have here all the examples of foreign retailers coming into the markets, they're expanding across countries. This will take time to make a significant change of the landscape of the markets. So let's talk a little bit about the players, right? So because today's session is about retailers in Africa. Now, I think there's an interesting thing that we found out. There's two types of retailers, two types of players. There's the new entrants, the foreigners, and there's the local champions as well. I think our view here is as well that both of them have their own sets of challenges. So on the left-hand side, we brought in the very recent example of Nakumatt in Kenya, who is facing some real issues in the market. Here, the types of challenges that they're facing is a little bit of a lack of sophistication in their retail approach. They probably allocate shelf space not in the most effective way, etc. On a second point, they've stretched their network expansion, probably seeing foreigners coming in, accelerating the expansion, and this created shortage of capital, and they could not face some, some of their underperforming stores and recover from that. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, you also have the multinational retail banners. I think it's a common perception that retail is a very difficult business to export, right? So retailers frequently, and there's multiple examples, frequently coming to countries and then they fail and they need to adapt or exit, right? So we've seen that happening in many markets in Africa and outside of Africa. There's difficulties understanding the local consumer preferences, adapting the local product portfolio. There's the issue of importing products and serving the local market with the only imported products. That usually doesn't work after a certain amount of time. So we've seen that happening in many places. But we also have seen that once this is cracked and the model is adapted and the model is kind of fine-tuned to the local realities, some of the retailers manage to make significant to take significant positions in foreign markets. We have the example of China, where Carrefour it has been quite successful and has been expanding significantly. So what does this mean going forward, and what are, there's the outside world, what's happening in grocery retailing? Walmart, Whole Foods was just bought by Amazon, so these were the big news. What does this mean? Is there any impact in the African continent? So there's a few teasers for the audience. We've seen in Africa quite successful leapfrogging of certain technologies. You take telecom and you take mobile money. These are the two classic examples. I think our question here, to our teaser to the audience is, are there things happening in retail that will also innovate and put Africa on the map of grocery retailing? Our view is threefold. So on one hand, we have the international banners who are actively expanding. So we have the South African players and European players mostly, who will keep expanding with the difficulties of adapting their models to the local realities, with the difficulties of sourcing their products locally. But they will be working hard on these two things. And then we'll have the national champions who will probably will step up their kind of retail game and will modernize or probably get acquired, etc. So there will be some changes right there. And then we'll have the large traditional retail, which in our view it's going to be there, and it's going to be there very strongly for the upcoming years. And basically for consumer goods companies, they will need to learn how to work with this channel far better than they've been doing so far. Right, so let's jump to the second part. This is all about shopping malls. So we finished the grocery part, and we're going to malls. So here's a tracker that we do on malls across Africa. We've been doing this study for 5 years now, and so we can see these are on the left-hand side number of malls present in Africa, excluding South Africa. So if you put South Africa, these numbers probably would have been double. So we see a pretty strong growth of about 7% a year of new mall opening across Africa. And on the right-hand side, you have some examples of new malls opening and the large ones coming into the market. So Mall of Egypt and Two Rivers, Novare in Nigeria as well. Now, if we look at the landscape, so first of all, North Africa is quite big, right? So the market in North Africa has been very strong in recent years, even with all the economic and the political situation. Egypt is leading that with lots of developments coming on stream. Then the other factor and the other surprising or not so surprising characteristic of the market is that malls are pretty small, right? So malls are most of them below 70,000 square meters of gross leasable area. We have 9 malls, and all of them in North Africa that are above these areas, and all the rest are somewhere below. Internationally, this is relatively small. For Africa, this is the stage that the market is kind of supporting. I think there's other aspects that we've seen and we come across. There is a tendency for having the mall as a leisure destination, and food and beverages as a very important sector for the malls. We think that it's usually a very important part of the business, because most of the cities do not have a lot of leisure areas, and they have safety concerns. So the mall is a destination where it's safe, and it's kind of modern, clean, etc. to spend your time as a destination. Now, again, going to the challenges. What's happening, and what are our the developers that we've been working with, and the players struggling with or facing challenges. So there's definitely a topic about generating traffic and how to sustain that. In our view, there's a big topic about serving the 90% of the population that do not have a car, right? So today's malls, and even especially the bigger ones, are based on the model of you park your car, you go to the mall, and then you come back. So what about the 90% of the people in a city that do not have a car and that also have some consumption power right there? We think that's a big topic that it hasn't been addressed so much so far by developers. Then the second topic, and it's probably one of the biggest topics, is the relevant tenants. Quite often we find that there's a portfolio of tenants and they are all the same across malls. And somehow we believe that in the coming years there will be the need to attract the different brands to coming into the country. And usually what's happening is that the brands are not in the country, so it's difficult for them. It's a catch-22, right? So you don't have the brands in the country. You need to convince the brands to come into the country. But this will be crucial to differentiate your malls by your portfolio of tenants. So we believe that this is going to be one of the key areas. The developers that manage to get different assortments of tenants will make their properties far more attractive. Which goes to the third point. This will be the biggest trigger for managing your competitiveness. Here's again some data from our studies. So we have what we call retail trade density tracker, and this is for Nairobi. We can see the retail performance in the different sets of locations in the city. So these are averages of several tenants among those malls in the different areas. What we find is huge differences. And here the take-home point is managing your properties will make a huge difference to your tenants, and therefore will also make a huge difference for your success of your mall. So we see the area of the junction in Nairobi, where you have trade densities of $294 per square meter per month versus 321 on the Karen area with the hub that just opened. So now, jumping back to the players and to the tenants, some tenants, and here we brought here 2 examples. Some tenants are really expanding into other markets. So Mr. Price jumping into all sorts of countries, and they're looking for attractive properties to base their stores. And then on the next slide, we have probably a less known example of Yves Rocher, who opened very recently, starting by North Africa, but across other countries. They're expanding rapidly with relatively small store formats, but it's a quite interesting example of a tenant that has been quite successful in creating a development plan across Africa, which could be an interesting example to show other types of brands. Right, so here are some maybe some provocative comments for the audience. You know, what should be the future for in the mall space and in the Africa shopping mall scene, and what future innovations should we be seeing in the market? We've put down four points. So on one hand, traffic generation for the properties. Secondly, affordability. How can we get more towards the 90% of the population that do not have cars, basically? Then the third point about the tenant differentiation and development. So how can the malls convince new tenants of new brands to come into the country, and what's needed? Typically, it's all about the distributors, the customs, etc., etc. So there's plenty of things to do that. And then the third point is probably about costs. So there's cost of land, cost of development, the time for development. It's also an issue in many countries. So there's some points there. And I think with that, I'll just open the questions to the panel, to the audience. Comments? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Natasha. I'm a real estate lawyer from Zambia. And my question is, when you talk about how to get the majority of the population that don't have transport and issues of affordability, the majority of that population are serviced by the local markets and kiosks. I'm from Zambia, so we have a lot of these kiosks along the road. And every time I come to South Africa, the most difficult thing for me is to buy talk time, because I have to drive to a filling station or a petrol station, whereas at home, I have people on the streets, there are kiosks all over the place, so there's accessibility in that respect. So I'm wondering, is it really a problem? What is the real problem that we're trying to solve when you bring out that statistic?
No, it's probably not a problem. You know, our view is from the perspective of the retailers. Their business is about distribution. So from the perspective of the retailers, it's competition, right? So it's just the characteristics of the market, but it's not necessarily a problem. For the retailers, we think it's a problem, right? Because for them, they would like to grab, you know, the market to serve the population, right? So right there, it's an issue. That capillarity of informal retail, we believe it won't go away. It might be slightly replaced, but as you said, it's very convenient, and it's the only way that population access to the goods. On the other hand, it's also a problem or an issue for the consumer goods companies, because it's far more difficult to serve those kiosks, and it's far more obscure how that process goes, and a bit more expensive as well. So those are the two sets of issues. More questions? And comments, please feel free to react and contribute, or with examples that you might have.
Dion from Forum Properties. You had a slide up there where you showed Nigeria 7 malls, Kenya 8 malls. What size did you use to qualify this? Is it above 10,000 or above 15,000 GLA? What was your gauge there?
It should be malls open since 2016, new malls open since 2016, right? So that's not the total number of malls. So a total number, I don't have the number in my top of my head in Nigeria, but so we have 413 in Africa, and that should cover pretty much anything that's a mall, right? So it's pretty small, we usually cover. So, but those are the new malls, just to be clear. So that's quite one of the big countries with the developments coming in. Yes.
My name is Funke Okubadejo. I work with the actors. When you were talking, you mentioned about some of the malls above 70,000, sort of like a benchmark. In our market in Nigeria in particular, I think the biggest mall is probably sitting something around 25,000. And today, yesterday, we had a lot of people reacting and saying 25,000 is probably too big for the market going forward. I just wanted to ask, what is your view in terms of the sizing? Because the sizing is probably going to be lower. And in terms of the appetite for foreign retailers coming to the market, because about 4 years ago, a lot of effort was put in trying to attract foreign retailers, and the biggest concern they had was, one, the size of the malls, and also the feasibility of being able to open multiple branches almost at the same time. So I think the problem sort of seems to be getting tougher to be able to bring in this for international retailers.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's the challenge of the small size malls. Foreign retailers, oftentimes they don't look at anything below 60,000 and they just say, this is way too small for us. And then we need to have a stream of properties coming on board so that we can have an expansion plan. And so that's, again, it's a little bit of a catch-22. If you don't have anything, nothing starts, but you need to have a pipeline of things coming for and that's probably what's putting international retailers on the cautious side to enter Africa, is because they don't see enough properties coming on stream, even in countries where there's lots of developments, Kenya, Nigeria, etc. So that's a little bit the challenge. I don't have the answer to that, right? So if you, you know, whoever cracks this code will get it, right? Go ahead.
I'm just, sorry, Chinwei from JLL, West Africa. I was negotiating with my girl here. That is it really the size of the retail mall that is the issue for foreign retailers, or the pricing? Because again, you have certain high-end net worth individuals in our countries, but those people usually will travel out to buy things and will not maybe necessarily be willing to pay the additional costs if they're doing that comparison. And then if you're pricing for the local market, yes, if you're in the US or in Europe, the pricing may seem reasonable. By the time you put in the FX issue, in our countries, these things may be expensive. So is it really an issue of the size of the mall or just a pricing parameter from your experience?
Okay, so for the retailers not to coming into the countries, you said, right? There's several things. So there's the size of the mall and the traffic that they can attract, because there's a correlation to that. So usually retailers say, well, we need certain traffic numbers to support our business case. Then there's the issue of the rental prices in certain countries. They are pretty steep for the country that that you have. And then there's the taxation and getting your products into the country, because that's a big issue, right? So if you take fast fashion, it's a huge problem, right? If stuff gets stuck in the port for a couple of months, that's, it's a problem. Plus the taxation of those goods as well, right? So that you take, I'm thinking Inditex, right? So if you take the price points of the Zaras, they're probably okay for the local market. But then you put in the transport costs, the taxation, et cetera, and they won't become okay anymore, right? So that's, yeah. Go ahead.
Madivana from JLL, this side.
Here, yes.
I just wanted to find out, do you track vacancies? And if so, what are you seeing in terms of the new developments that are coming on the market, are they attracting tenants?
So vacancies in properties, in individual properties,
Yeah, in the retail, yeah.
in shopping malls?
Yeah.
We do not. We track new malls coming on stream. And your question was, sorry?
I just wanted to find out if you do track vacancies, are you seeing a lot of take-up with the new malls that are coming on the market?
So we don't track vacancies, and we see the new malls coming up on stream. You have the examples of Kenya. They're not fully occupied. I mean, there's a little bit of a different approach when opening a mall in most markets. Is that they take step by step. So you would open the mall even with 30% of the tenants, and you will still open the mall and go ahead with that. So that's quite common to see. That's usually not the practice in most international markets, where it's more like a big bang, and you have to have at least 80% of occupancy or something like that.
Sorry, earlier on you mentioned the informal kiosks and how FMCG companies have a hard time getting their products to those kind of people. And the lady at the back there mentioned how accessible those informal kiosks are to the local people and serving them. So now, my issue is, how do you marry all the aspects of these things? Because you have technology disrupting the retail space in terms of having access to online shopping, because most people now on the African continent have access to the internet. And then you also have the issue of, as you've mentioned, that international retailers will not look at a mall if it's smaller than 60,000 squares. So how do you find like a balance with all those aspects when it all just comes to play?
I'm not sure you're going to find those are forces, right? So I think those forces will be out there, and they will shape the future, right? So our view is that informal retail will stay. It's so big, so convenient that it will be a huge force, and it will stay that way for the coming years. But we also see the traditional modern retailers coming in with their large format stores and modern distribution, and those will take up more and more space of the market, and then it's a question mark if the online will play a role, especially in grocery retailing. We don't see that happening that fast even in the Western world. I mean, there's several examples of failed attempts in the early 2000s of the big disruption was coming in. Nothing came in, right? So, and now Amazon is buying Whole Foods. Let's see how that goes. As an online shopping experience, right? So there's huge difficulties to make that happen, and we don't think it's going to happen in Africa as well. So we believe that grocery retailing will be grocery retailing more traditional way. Technology might play a role in different aspects of that retail. And it could play a role as well in the traditional part of retailing as brands try to, tackle that channel. So that's where we see it, the impact. Yes. Okay, so we're done here. If you want a copy of the presentation, I'm very happy to share that with you. Just drop me an email or speak to me later on. All right, thanks very much.